Let's talk about 3 ways you can buy land in Dallas and the traps you can run into if you don't know what you're doing. Well, hello, this is Wendy Pinnell, and many of our buyers invest in land and have a home built on it. Most of the time though, they do this through a home builder where they're limited to floor plans the builder offers as well as the lots that the builder owns. Like, I don't know, for example, typically the lot sizes you'll find will be like 60 feet wide by 120 feet deep, and you're really not gonna score more than like, a 7,200 square foot lot. The lot is also gonna be like a blank palette, okay? And by that I mean it'll be cleared and all mature trees removed. So that is one way of doing it, but what if you want a larger lot? I mean, maybe you want a half acre, or maybe a whole acre, maybe more. Maybe you want a lot that comes with trees. Or what if you want the flexibility of designing your own home? Those options are absolutely available in Dallas. What you want to know is the research process behind evaluating land so you don't find yourself making huge investment mistakes. Okay, so for example, let's just say you're looking at raw, undeveloped land. How are you going to do your due diligence on it? Well, there are 3 major types of land you may find yourself interested in building on. The first is raw and undeveloped land. Now, in this case, the land is often owned by an individual, might be a company, but they haven't made any attempts to develop it, right? I mean, oftentimes it could be like an individual or company. They purchase it, maybe thinking they're gonna develop it someday, but like due to finances, or city rules, they aren't able to get around to their plans and they end up just deciding to put the land up for sale instead. If you're looking at a plot of raw and undeveloped land, you'll have to answer to the city when it comes to what you can and can't do on the land. So you'll want to find out a few very important things, okay? First of all, how is it zoned? The city will have restrictions for the plot through zoning. For example, if the land you're interested in is zoned commercial, you won't be able to build your dream house there unless you can somehow get it rezoned. The city has more of a hold on it than that though, okay? For example, in Dallas, you have layers of zoning, and it could be very vague or it could be really restrictive. For example, in our neighborhood, we don't have an HOA, but we are in a planned development, okay? And that's another zoning at a city level. The planned development dictates how far back from the street the house has to be, how tall it can be, how much of the lot it can take up, okay, that kind of thing. Well, behind our home, we have a 6-acre tract of land for sale. It's also in our planned development. So the rules of the PD say it can only be replatted to make it bigger. So we can have the peace of mind of knowing we're not gonna get like a large amount of homes behind our house. So even though city zoning is often broad, it can be restrictive and honestly protective to your investment. Okay, so here's an example of an unimproved lot in Salina. The address is 3200 Rigsby. You can see it doesn't have a subdivision. It obviously doesn't have an HOA, but it is zoned for residential use. It has no restrictions and no easements. And you can see from the pictures how it has these beautiful mature trees, right? But the listing really doesn't tell us much else. So these kinds of lots will require research at the city level. You want to know what the restrictions are on this lot, but also what the restrictions are on all of the lots in the same area. The second common type of land you may want to build on is a lot where a developer has been involved. Now, often the lot will be plat approved. The areas surrounding that particular parcel will even have streets and utilities installed, but there's no builder to begin building there. And again, you'll answer to the city, but this time you'll also have to answer to the developer as well. And in this case, your land will already have its zoning, right? It'll also already have covenants, conditions, and restrictions from the developer. Nowadays, you'll probably have an HOA as well, but not always. Now, this type of community will have numerous parcels sold off one lot at a time, and each buyer will hire their own builder and design their own house. So don't expect a bunch of matching home styles here. An example of this, again in Salina, is Lot 21 Amberlin Trail. Now we can see some differences right off in that this lot is in a subdivision known as the Thomas Allen Survey. It has an HOA and it's zoned for residential use. When we look at restrictions, it directs you to look at the deed, and easements are described as utilities. We already know how you can use this lot will be far more restricted just by the fact it has an HOA. Now, if you look at the pictures in this listing, you can see already how it's different. A developer is on the scene and has subdivided the acreage into uniformly sized lots. Then, if you look at the listing description, it reads, bring your own builder. So with our undeveloped land, could be anyone, an individual, a company, whatever. But with this land, it's owned by a developer, okay? But it's still not owned by a builder. In order to build on this land, you'll need to find your own custom builder and design your own floor plan. So the possibilities here are endless, but you will still have to submit to the city's rules and the developer's rules as to what you can build. So whether or not you'll get trees, it's a wild card. Okay, plenty of times you won't, because it's just easier on the developer to clear them all out. But there still are opportunities with plenty of trees. Okay, the third common type of land you'll find people buying in Dallas is an area where an actual builder has been involved. It will also likely be plat approved with the streets and utilities already installed. Now, this situation starts out similarly to the previous one, but in this case, the developer had a builder to sell either all or some of the lots to. Now here, you'll have to answer to the city, the developer, and the builder. That's right, you'll be sorting through multiple layers of restriction when it comes to building and even living there. You won't be able to bring in your own builder, nor will you be able to bring in your own building plans. The builder will give you several to choose from, along with lots you can choose as well. Now, this type of situation, it's ideal, for someone who doesn't have a lot of time to devote to finding a builder and designing building plans. As you can see, each of the three types of land to buy have different levels of freedom when it comes to what you can or cannot build. And so this is something to keep in mind as you begin your search for the perfect lot. Okay, so now that you know how to find all of the answers you'll need for each parcel, what are the actual questions you need answers to in order to ensure you don't make any serious mistakes? Well, first of all, you'll want to avoid problems with deed restrictions on the lot. Now, some may be more lenient than you want, while some may be, quite a bit more strict than you want. Okay, but most importantly, you absolutely have to research this. Let's walk through each of the three types of land again and their restrictions. When it comes to raw and undeveloped land, your restriction is zoning through the city. And while this may sound great to you, okay, you also need to know that you may be very unprotected in this case. I mean, sure, it may be that some of you want it that way, but before you take the plunge and buy the land, stop to think about all the things that could be built next to you. What if the lot next to yours is rezoned to commercial or industrial land? Like, you never know what kind of commercial or industrial monstrosities could end up as your next door neighbor. The only thing protecting you here is the city. A landowner can petition to the city to change the zoning of their lot. Well, what happens if the city says yes? There are no other layers protecting you from potentially ending up as neighbors with, manufactured home community, specialized camp, or even a factory. If you're feeling lost on whether or not to take the risk with a piece of raw, undeveloped land, one thing to consider is that the city has policing power. In other words, they have enforcing power through code enforcement. So if there are restrictions in place on the land next to yours, they can be enforced. What you've got to do is find out what restrictions there are to protect you. Some common restrictions you'll find in city zoning, like I mentioned before, how large the lots must be, setback requirements, how tall a home can be, how much space it can take up on your lot, okay, that sort of thing. It all depends on the zoning designation. These are things you can look into to assess how much risk the land next door has of being rezoned and turned into something you really don't want to be neighbors with. With developed land where there is no builder, it'll be governed by covenants, conditions, and restrictions, and they might be, relatively broad and unrestrictive, or they may be way more specific than you would like. Okay, so what are covenants, conditions, and restrictions? Well, Cornell Law School tells us that covenants, conditions, and restrictions commonly called CC&Rs, are a set of rules governing the use of a certain piece of real estate in a given community. It can regulate things like fences, the type of garbage cans, and whether parties can open businesses in the community. This probably sounds pretty similar to an HOA, right? Well, yeah, most CC&Rs nowadays come with HOAs to enforce them. However, there are plenty of older neighborhoods with CC&Rs that don't have HOAs. So listen, this is what you need to know. If a CC&R doesn't have an HOA to enforce it, the only way you can enforce them is through court. Like, you literally have to file a civil lawsuit to enforce them. So while CC&Rs can be more restrictive than the city, if they don't have an HOA as well, then there's no easy way to enforce those restrictions. Okay, for example, the city may say you can't have cows, but the CC&Rs say you can't have pet pigs. Well, both rules are enforceable, but one is enforceable through policing power and code enforcement, while the other is only enforced through civil action like a lawsuit. Okay, moving on to land with builders. With this type of land, you'll have the most homogeneous neighborhood, but this is also where you may be more likely to find restrictiveness is a problem. For example, do you want chickens? Do you want to be able to run a small business from your home? If you have teenagers with cars, is there a limit on how many cars you can have? Do you want to do a garage conversion? You may be surprised to find that the builder restrictions don't allow any of these things. Throughout your research process for all of these, keep in mind who can enforce and how they can enforce. The city has policing power through code enforcement, but I should say though, they don't tend to like just patrol, neighborhoods, okay? Most of the time, code enforcement responds to like specific complaints. With CC&Rs, if there's no HOA, this is the hardest one to enforce. The complaining party has to file a lawsuit. So say one of your neighbors gathers junked out cars or has those pesky pet pigs. If it's not against city zoning, you have to file a lawsuit to enforce the CC&Rs. Now, on the other hand, HOAs, they're very enforceable. They can fine you and literally take your home right out from under you. So if you like the idea of enforceable CC&Rs in your future, then you definitely want to look for one that comes with an HOA. You'll just want to keep in mind any of the unique things you might want in a home, right? Things that may seem like they shouldn't cause any problems, they might in fact be restricted. All right, for example, okay, here's one. What if you want an accessory dwelling unit on your property for the next generation or even like your aging parents? All right, this is where custom building can be a very good thing. The thing is, you need to thoroughly consider how restrictive or lenient you want an area to be. Now, another important thing you'll want to find answers to before buying is whether or not you're over improving for where you want to build. Okay, now here's what I mean. Don't overbuild for the neighborhood. If you want to build a 4,000 square foot dream home and you found a beautiful lot in a neighborhood full of 2,000 square foot homes, don't do it. Instead, underbuild. And by that, I mean have bigger homes surrounding you. If you're the smallest home in the area, your value will be raised by all of the larger surrounding homes. If you're the largest home in an area, it'll flip. So don't let your home's value be brought down by smaller homes. Now, this applies in all situations, and depending on how developed the area is, it can require some serious due diligence in looking into the other surrounding lots and what can be built on them. So think back to deed restrictions. If you're one of the first buyers and you build a luxury home, how small can homes be? Like, what if you end up surrounded by small homes? Now, moving on, you'll also want to gather information on what is provided by the city. Now here you're talking about your wallet and your budget, okay? So you have to consider things like water, trash, sewer, right? The sewage system alone can send you like way over budget. So like, is it city sewer or septic, right? With a builder developed neighborhood, whether it's city sewer or septic, The builder will be absorbing the cost and it won't come as a surprise to you. However, this can come back to bite you a whole lot more when it's raw land or when there's a developer but no builder. You'll be hiring your own builder and you need to be able to carefully plan out your budget. Your expenses will differ depending on the sewage system. Tank Depot shares how the cost of septic tanks and sewers depends on the size and type of system. Septic tank costs can range from $1,000 to $4,000, while sewer costs are typically incurred on the initial connection and can range from $10,000 to $50,000. So which one should you go for? Well, Tank Depot also comments on the cost efficiency of each. They say septic tanks are less expensive to build than complex sewage lines, which may be difficult to install and link with the city. Similarly, you'll want to do some research whether or not your lot has or will have city water or well water. And what if you buy raw land and find out it's not set up for water? Putting in a well can be really expensive. Forbes explains that the average cost to drill a well is $5,625, but homeowners may spend anywhere between $3,000 and $9,000 for the typical well drilling project. They continue, much of the cost depends on the depth of the well, but other factors can drive up the cost of a new well, including distance from the main property, the cost of other materials, and any required permits. So if you don't want to add an extra $3,000 to $9,000 to your house budget, you may want to buy land that already has city water and sewer. Next up, be sure that you find or get a survey for the parcel you want to buy. Even more so, once you have the survey, always pay attention to it. Now, I want to tell you a personal story, okay? When we bought the house we're at now, we got a survey, of course, but the land between ours and the neighbors was like a giant field, okay? It was weird. We didn't have a fence, and there weren't any natural boundaries like bushes until you got to like the back section, which was like all woods. So we went out, we had a shed built, and the neighbors were not too happy with us. They felt we had encroached on their land, and things got kind of ugly there for a while. We had to go deep in the woods at the back of our lot and find the survey rod and then try to like draw a straight line to figure out whether or not the shed was encroaching. I mean, if it was like by inches, right? And that was hard to prove. But here's where our problem came into play. The zoning for our neighborhood said any accessory structures had to have a 10-foot side setback. Well, our neighbors called in code enforcement and we ended up having to move our shed. If it was just a CC&R, they would have had to file a civil suit to make us move the shed. But because it was a city zoning issue, the city had enforcement power. So the lesson of the story is to really do your due diligence and survey city zoning research prior to buying and building, even if it's only a shed. If you get a title policy, you'll end up with a survey anyways, but always check that survey carefully before you make the neighbors mad like we did. So here's the thing, building on unimproved land makes sense if you're detail oriented and you have plenty of time for planning. It also makes sense if you don't appreciate all the restrictions you'll find with developers and builders. If you're a free-spirited sort with plenty of time to plan, unimproved land makes sense. Now, improved land being sold by a developer, okay, will generally get you a much bigger lot with the option of using a custom builder. Now, it's not quite the blank slate unimproved land is, but you'll still have a lot more choices. Then you have new builds being sold by a builder with only certain floor plans to choose from. This is the most restrictive approach, but you can still do a lot of customization and pick out your own lot. And honestly, if you're choosing, between pre-constructed homes and building a new one, there are gonna be times when building from scratch makes the most sense, even if it's in a community, that's governed by the builder. In fact, I made an entire video about those times that you can watch right here. In the meantime, Wendy out.